Hi everyone, welcome to VMworld 2020. I'm Chris Cord. I'm the Vice President of Product Management for our security business unit here at VMware, and I'm super excited to give this session to you today because it combines a lot of what we've been working on at VMware over the last few years, which is the ways in which we can leverage our infrastructure, our virtual infrastructure capability to deliver security in a more operationally efficient and ultimately a more secure fashion. Combines that capability with all of the next generation security functionality that Carbon Black Cloud delivers. And that's culminated this year into a release that we call Carbon Black Workload, which was announced this year at the show. And I ultimately think it really provides truly unique and differentiated functionality for you to be able to secure your workloads, your critical workloads that are running your most valuable assets in the data center, and do it in a way that ultimately you can't get from an individual security provider because they don't have access to the unique capability that we can provide inside of your running ESX infrastructure. So just to give you a sense of the capability that the Carbon Black Cloud brings to us inside of the VMware security portfolio, this is obviously a widely trusted brand for security. Over 15,000 customers, probably close to 20,000 customers use Carbon Black on a regular basis to protect their enterprises from advanced cyber attacks. Over 10 million endpoints are protected every day in our customer environments. These are endpoints of all different types. These could be standard Mac, Linux, Windows machines that are running end user from an end user perspective, or they could be environments that are running inside of your data center already, where you're just simply deploying Carbon Black as is as a sensor in that environment in order to be able to protect a critical asset inside of your data center. And what makes, I think, Carbon Black really unique is the way in which we provide protection for these environments, which is truly using the capability of a next generation security cloud, which is we call the Carbon Black Cloud, to provide advanced analytics, advanced detection, and ultimately advanced prevention against modern attacks, which relies on a very large data set for analysis and monitoring on a day-to-day basis. So just to give you a sense of that size, we collect over 1 trillion events per day, not just collect, but analyze 1 trillion events per day inside of the Carbon Black Cloud. And we do that ultimately to get a better understanding of attacker behavior, a better understanding and modeling of normalcy, what's expected inside of our customer environments, and ultimately use that as a feed into our advanced analytics engine to create better detection models and better prevention models for our customers to be able to rely on a day-to-day basis. And this is really where the industry is moving from a pure security perspective. It has a much higher degree of effectiveness when you take approaches like this versus traditional signature-based approaches in security, but it does rely very heavily on having a true built from the ground up multi-tenant cloud platform so that you can be able to scale to this kind of data requirements and really deliver this in a seamless fashion. And that's ultimately what the Carbon Black Cloud provides, is it gives you this level of capability in a true multi-tenant cloud infrastructure built from the ground up. So just to give you a little idea of the type of use cases that we solve on a day-to-day basis inside the Carbon Black Cloud, it really fits into these 3 buckets. The first is around identification of risk. This is where you want to be able to get a good understanding and baseline of how the environment is operating today and really understand where you might have risky configuration or risky setup before you even get to a prevention, detection, and response workflow. So clearly when you start to move down the path of prevention, detection, and response, you're now in a situation where you believe there's attacker activity happening inside the infrastructure. Someone is trying to run malicious software, or someone is trying to perform malicious behavior, and ultimately we have to take action against those. Identification of risk allows you to first start to get an understanding of how your environment is configured, whether or not you're running any vulnerable software, and gives you the opportunity to protect and ultimately patch that risk so that you don't necessarily have to worry about a prevention or detection and response activity downstream. This ultimately splits up into two areas. The first is how do we ensure that the environment has the proper configuration, mostly based on proper compliance benchmarks. And number two, how do we make sure that you're not running and operating vulnerable software or running or operating vulnerable operating systems. As it relates to workloads, this is an even heightened capability, right? Because you should have the opportunity of hardening and protecting your workloads even more upfront than you would be your end user devices. They're more admin controlled than your end user devices. So we'll talk about it in the introduction of Carbon Black Workload. We've really put a lot of emphasis on the identification and control of risk, and actually built in some of that control directly into the hands of the vAdmins so that they can do a better job in configuring the environment up front and not have to worry about some of the security concerns downstream. Clearly, we'd all like to be perfect and reduce all risk out of the environment to begin with. The world is an imperfect place. You're not always going to get that type of a setup. So we do have to rely on or count on really, really good prevention capability. And this is an area where Carbon Black has really significantly advanced what VMware has been offering from a next generation security functionality. And this basically boils down to how do I stop bad stuff from happening inside the infrastructure. So for a particular workload, to really have true next generation prevention, you have to be able to prevent both malware-based attacks, things that are just running malicious files, and non-malware-based attacks. And this is where an attacker might leverage built-in tools into the operating system, things like PowerShell, other scripting languages, and they're using that legitimate software to perform illegitimate or malicious activity. And you have to be able to provide not just detection of those types of things, but prevention of those types of things. And that's truly what makes Carbon Black a next generation prevention and antivirus tool, is our ability to actually stop both of those types of attacks. And then the last piece of this is purely around data visibility and forensics. You can't always provide, real-time prevention of activity like this. You do have to ultimately stay on top of a lot of potential low-level activity to sniff out the more advanced attackers. That's where endpoint detection and response comes into play. This is where you want to be able to keep a pretty wide forensic trail of evidence across all of your endpoints and workloads. You want to be able to run specific watch lists that your security team needs to get access to look at specific types of activity for potential forensic purposes. And you also want to be able to really investigate and analyze that data in kind of a zoom in and zoom out perspective. And then, of course, if you do run into an incident, you need to be able to take response. All of these things make up what we believe is a holistic picture into how you should protect your critical assets, your workloads in particular. Unfortunately, what happens in the industry is, in order to provide this level of capability to kind of protect a workload from top to bottom, you're wound up left with deploying and delivering a pretty wide set of individual products that all have their individual management consoles, policies that you have to set up and create. But even worse, all have their own agents that you have to deploy down to your endpoints and your workloads. And you can sort of stomach that. I mean, it's bad enough when you're doing that on an end user's laptop, and the worst thing that happens is they might have their laptop crash or something to that effect because you're running too many different products and too many different agents. But when you're running critical workloads, that is a near impossibility, right? So you need to be able to take a more focused view and ultimately consolidate the amount of agents that you're running on your critical workloads. You need to try to protect the amount of processing power that you're delivering on those workloads. In the case of virtual machines, you want to be able to get a higher degree of utilization out of your virtual infrastructure, so you don't want to waste CPU cycles. But at the end of the day, you also want to just make sure that you're not wasting time with operational overhead for agents being deployed across a variety of products, right? So just the simple installation and lifecycle management of agents can be hugely problematic. So you need to be able to just take that burden away from your system administrators and just make it easier to secure the environment. So the first thing that Carbon Black Cloud provides for any environment, not just ESX environments, is the ability of consolidating these use cases into a single sensor, single platform experience where we have one sensor running on any device, and the data stream that's coming off of that sensor feeds into one backend cloud platform. And it's on top of that backend cloud platform where we perform our detection analysis, our machine learning techniques, and where our threat analysis unit can actually ultimately look at attacker behavior and write and create prevention policy and rules on your behalf. So for any environment, not just for vSphere environments, but for any environment, you get the benefit of consolidation of agents using the Carbon Black Cloud, mainly because you have the capability of consolidating these use cases into a single sensor and single backend cloud platform. Now, that's great in and of itself, but what can we do differently? I talked about all the unique capabilities that we think we can bring to the table on top of what Carbon Black does by combining that with vSphere. So there's a few things that we can do differently. The first is we can actually take that single sensor, take that benefit of agent consolidation and actually remove the burden of agent deployment altogether. So we can make that sensor a native piece of the ESXi infrastructure so that you never even have to worry about deployment or management of a sensor to begin with on your vSphere environments. The second thing we can do is we can put a heavier degree of emphasis on reducing risk and providing the ability for the people that are managing and maintaining the environment to get a clear view into the most important vulnerabilities that they should patch to make sure they reduce the highest amount of risk. And then the last thing we can do is we can better align the viewpoint that security has or needs, which is this view into threats that are happening, vulnerabilities that need to be patched, data that they need to get access to in order to perform security investigations. We can better align that workflow to the IT administrators, right? Because those are the people that need to make sure that the environment is operationally maintained, that the applications are running appropriately, that they're getting the right utilization from the environment. And we need to be able to provide them with some information so that they can do their job better while still maintaining a good security posture. So going back to our picture of these control points, the way Carbon Black Workload delivers this is by actually leveraging our most ubiquitous control point, which is vSphere. So we take the core capability of the ESX hypervisor, and we use that core capability to ultimately deliver security provided by and backed by the Carbon Black Cloud in a much more efficient way. So with the Carbon Black Cloud Workload release here at VMworld, effectively what we've done is we've taken this core set of current functionality that our customers use today with Carbon Black, and we've expanded that out to include a number of things. The first thing we've done is we've expanded it out to include the introduction of new real estate, specifically going beyond just providing operating system sensors and agents that operate on Windows, Mac, and Linux, but actually providing native infrastructure components directly built in for vSphere. The second thing that we've done is also provided that footprint to be able to be delivered on top of Kubernetes environments, because obviously the world is moving into a modern application footprint, and you need to be able to deliver security for workloads, whether they run on virtual machines or Kubernetes. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're really focused on the virtual machine use case. On top of that real estate, we've expanded the use cases to do a few things. The first is we've provided a deeper viewpoint into risk reduction components, right? So we provided a deeper viewpoint into vulnerability management in particular. So this is a capability that wasn't part of the Carbon Black Cloud prior to this release, and we've really advanced the bar here on vulnerability management and embedded not just standard views into vulnerabilities, but actually advanced scoring and prioritization on vulnerabilities. The other thing that we've done is we've added visibility into workload posture and provided you the ability to use our audit and remediation functionality to get an understanding of any misconfigurations that might be in place, any compliance issues that you might run into, and ultimately get a better view into risky configuration on those workloads. So that's ultimately where the Carbon Black Cloud workload product comes into play. Like I mentioned, it fits into these three buckets, and the benefit that you get is on top of this native vSphere integration, where I can, with a click of a button, natively just enable Carbon Black Cloud to run on any vSphere workload. I get the benefit of combining these use cases across the board. I can start by just looking at identification of risk and just understanding current state and getting a better understanding of vulnerabilities that need to be patched. But also with that same footprint, I can expand that functionality to provide next generation antivirus. And I do not have to go through any sensor upgrade or any other installation of anything different on that environment in order to get a full-scale antivirus replacement. So the real benefit here is with the same footprint that you can deploy quickly and easily to get a viewpoint into risk, you can now immediately move that into a prevention posture and actually potentially replace legacy or other AV tools that are running inside of your environment. And then we don't just stop there. We provide the ability for that same footprint to be extended into full-scale EDR. And this is where you get into really large-scale data retention, large-scale forensics of information, hooking that information back into a security event management system for detailed reporting. Again, these are things that security teams usually need a lot of. And in this case, with one single click of a button inside of vSphere, we're able to enable all of these workloads to be delivered in a pretty seamless fashion. So just to give you a little deeper insight into each one of these use cases, one of the first things that's included with Carbon Black Workload is this vCenter plugin. So like I said, we wanted to be able to give an aligned view to both our IT admins as well as our security administrators. In this case, we're giving the IT administrators that are in vCenter on a regular basis control over enabling Carbon Black Workload to run on any of their devices. And we can do this with a single click of a button. You get a full view into your vSphere inventory. You can select a single virtual machine. You can multi-select a number of virtual machines and just simply click Enable on those environments. And we immediately start activating Carbon Black to run on that infrastructure because we've built in all of the components into the vSphere infrastructure. It becomes super easy to run and enable this to go and start communicating with the backend Carbon Black Cloud. Inside of that plugin, we also provide a direct view into the vulnerabilities that exist in the environment. These are vulnerabilities that could be across both your operating systems, your Windows and Linux operating systems, as well as the applications that are running on top of your operating systems. And I can't stress this enough. Providing just data, a data dump of vulnerabilities is not enough. You need to be able to give some collective insight and some intelligence on top of that data in order for you to really get value out of it. So in this case, we provide ingrained scoring and prioritization for every single vulnerability that we provide. You can see across the top here, you'll be able to see those things easily laid out into critical vulnerabilities versus low or moderate vulnerabilities. And then towards the bottom, we give explicit risk scoring out of a number of 1 to 10. And we actually give you all of the reasons and why that score is delivered to you. And ultimately, it comes down to using those trillion events per day that are at our disposal, plus some partnerships that we have with third-party vulnerability feeds to be able to tell us not only is a vulnerability existing on your machines, but we're seeing that vulnerability be exploited in the wild. Therefore, you should treat it with a higher degree of urgency in order to be able to patch. And I think from a vAdmin's perspective, from their point of view, they now can clearly say, look, I have these 3 infected assets that have critical vulnerabilities. I know I have to prioritize and patch those first. I mentioned the ability to run direct queries and run canned reports to get workload visibility and workload posture. This is a really cool functionality where we have pre-canned reporting in order for you to be able to schedule and run those reports on a regular basis to get compliance posture and risk posture. We also have the ability to give you a full live query interface for you to be able to run any direct query that you want across your fleet of devices, which again can be a super powerful way of getting access to the right information. And then AV, a lot of this comes down to how effectively can I block and stop malicious activity. Carbon Black gives you that full control into antivirus and preventative controls, and obviously the ability of seeing attacker behavior and taking a remediation policy to stop it. And then the last piece is around EDR. I mentioned this is where you get to a more advanced posture and you need to be able to do more advanced investigation. This is typically usually a security administrator's day-to-day job to be able to look at these types of things. The key point here is with the same infrastructure components that we've delivered throughout the Carbon Black workload use case, you're able to scale up to a really super advanced use case like this without having to put in any additional components inside of your machines. So just to close here, talking about Carbon Black Workload and its capability, I think what's really unique here is the ability for us to provide this full span of workload protection that goes from things that you need to do every day, which is look at compliance and vulnerabilities, all the way up to really advanced use cases like detection and response, and do that through a single click of a button inside of vSphere. So it's a super powerful capability to really have change the way security is delivered for your critical assets and make it truly intrinsic so that it's just easier to deploy and ultimately more secure. Some sessions here if you want to learn more. There's some really cool things to check out if you want to hear more about Carbon Black Workload. I certainly recommend the keynote. There's a cool demo that we can provide in real time during the keynote, as well as a specialized session around vulnerability management for workloads, which I also recommend. And then if you are looking for a session more on virtual desktops and really tying into the virtual desktop use case, I recommend the last session. It's a really focused use case of Carbon Black to be able to deliver this type of functionality only for your virtual desktops. So again, thank you for your time today. Please take time to fill out the survey. But again, I'm super excited about the delivery of Carbon Black Workload to our customers. I really think it changes the game and how security can be done for your critical assets. So I'm really looking forward to it and enjoy the rest of the show.